In respect to be able to hear from a few more people on the point of order, on the Honourable House Leader for the official opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I understand that in the moment you might have made a ruling, as is common for chair occupants to do, before necessarily hearing arguments when that is expected to be of a routine nature. But as many chair occupants have had to deal with in the past, when parties raise substantive objections after an initial ruling, the Speaker has gone back and taken a look at that in light of the objections raised. So in that spirit, I hope that you will seriously consider the points that I am about to raise. Now, first, we should talk about how we got here, Mr. Speaker. Normally, under the motion that was adopted to guide votes in the House, there is a provision that any recorded division that is demanded is deferred until the next sitting day. So first and foremost, that would be the normal course of events. Today is the allotted day for the NDP. If that happened normally, at the end of the day, the Speaker would interrupt and the vote would be deferred until the next day. And all members would have the opportunity to study the main motion and any amendments that were received. That's not happening today for a very particular reason. And that reason is that on the sitting day prior to the 2-week constituency break, all parties agreed to not sit on the Friday after the passing of the Right Honourable Brian Mulroney, former Prime Minister of Canada, in order to facilitate the respect being given to former Prime Minister Mulroney. All parties agreed to a couple of things. First of all, the NDP agreed to have their opposition day today, Monday, instead of the Friday before that break period. In exchange for that, Conservatives agreed to a motion that would require the vote to be held at the end of the day. That was a good faith measure in order to accommodate the spirit of all MPs who were paying tribute to a deceased Prime Minister. That was granted. Now we find ourselves today in literally the 11th hour of the debate, a massive change to the motion. We're not just talking about a slight amendment to a coming into force date or tweaking a number here and there. We're talking about 14 substantive amendments to the main motion. And many of these amendments rise to the level of what I would urge you to rule is out of scope, because it rises to the level of having the same effect as defeating the motion itself. And House of Commons procedure and practice is very clear on this, that to have such a substantive amendment that it completely changes the nature of the original motion, that's out of order. Because the proper way of dealing with a motion that is unacceptable to a member of Parliament is to vote against it. If there's a small adjustment that could be made to accommodate one group or another, or one desire or another, or one perspective or another, that's one thing. And that happens all the time. There are amendments moved at committees, there's amendments moved in the floor. But to so dramatically alter the main motion, the jurisprudence on this from the Speaker is very clear, that rather than seeking to amend that motion, the proper course of action is for MPs to vote against the motion, defeat the motion, and then come back with a substantive motion that would incorporate the changes that any member was seeking. And as I go through the list, Mr. Speaker, the first one is so glaring. You know, the original motion calls on the Government of Canada to unilaterally recognize the state of Palestine. The amendment is so different that it's not just my view. I think any fair reading of the motion would say that in effect this has the effect of negating the original motion. Amendment M says, by replacing paragraph H with the following, reaffirm that settlements are illegal under international law and that settlements and settler violence are serious obstacles to a negotiated two-state solution, and advocate for an end to the decades-long occupation of Palestinian territories. That is substantially different than unilaterally recognizing the state of Palestine, including in Amendment N, which says, by replacing paragraph I with the following, work with international partners to actively pursue the goal of a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in the Middle East, including towards the establishment of the State of Palestine as part of a negotiated two-state solution. That is so different, Mr. Speaker. The original motion just says that Canada will recognize the State of Palestine. The amended motion says that it will work towards achieving that goal, work towards a negotiated two-state solution, which, by the way, is long-standing position of previous governments. That change is not, that is no mere grammatical or semantic change, Mr. Speaker. That is the crux of what is being debated today, a major point in the debate that has been carried all day today. So to bring that amendment in the form of a last-minute amendment to the main motion rises to the level of being so out of scope, so fundamentally altering the nature of the main motion that it should be ruled out of order. I could go on and on. There was no notice of this, Mr. Speaker. We in the opposition negotiated in good faith before the break week to accommodate the NDP supply day. We agreed to hold the vote at the end of the day. Normally, this vote would have been happened tomorrow. At the very least, there should have been some kind of notice, and I believe this calls for the Speaker to rule this amendment out of order, or at the very least, to use the power of the Chair to defer the vote until tomorrow, where in so doing, all MPs would have time to absorb these massive changes and vote on it. In essence, Mr. Speaker, give members of Parliament the time that they would have happened, that they would have had the normal course of the parliamentary calendar unfolded with supply days and deferred votes. So, Mr. Speaker, I strongly object to this motion being, these amendments being ruled in order. I urge you to reconsider in light of the precedents I've cited and the aspects of the amendment that contradict in such a direct way the essence of the main motion. Or at the very least, and I don't want to give you an alternative to what I just suggested because that is the main thrust of the argument, but at the very least, to use the power that the Speaker has to so order the flow of business to defer the vote until tomorrow, after which MPs will have had the time to examine exactly what is before them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, on that same point of order, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. First and foremost, I think it's important that we recognize that it was on March 1 when the House made an order indicating that we would actually be having the vote today at 7:15. That's an hour ago, Mr. Speaker. And every member before the recess understood that that vote would be taking place this evening. That's point one. The other issue that I have, Mr. Speaker, is take a look in terms of opposition days and the purpose of opposition days and the process that we've witnessed today before us. If you take a look at it, there is nothing that is not, or there is no new element that's being introduced to the motion, and I'll expand on that right away. What is important is to recognize the process that's got us to this point. The NDP introduced a motion. There's a great deal of debate on the motion. There's all sorts of crossover discussions that are taking place. And at the end of the day, the government House Leader then moved an amendment. That amendment, which is completely within scope, was accepted by the member from Edmonton Strathcona. And then, Mr. Speaker, you reread the amendment, and then after reading the amendment, you ruled that it was, in fact, in order. As it has been done previously on many different opposition days, Mr. Speaker. I take exception when members opposite try to give the false impression that it's out of scope. Let me give you an example, a very specific example. When they stood on the point of order to try to filibuster a vote, Mr. Speaker, ultimately, they made reference to the fact that it's the Gaza issue, a very important aspect of the amendment. Let's go to what the motion actually says about Gaza. And how can you deny that it in any way takes it out of the scope. I would refer people to III, the forceful transfer and violent attacks on Palestinians in the West Bank have significantly increased in recent months. So how can they say that an amendment dealing with West Bank is in fact out of scope when it's actually in the motion that's been presented? You can go further. Go to G, ban extremist settlers. Again, Mr. Speaker, how can you not identify that as also a part of Gaza? Go to H, advocate for an end to the decades-long occupation of Palestinian territories and work towards a two-state solution. Mr. Speaker, I would argue that the very premise after you, number one, agreed that everything was in order and the vote was just about to occur, a member stands up and brings up an issue saying that it is not within the scope, when in fact it is. It's actually mentioned. And if members would have listened to the Minister of Foreign Affairs when she made her presentation to the House, or other members even make reference to both the Gaza and West Bank, Mr. Speaker, I would suggest to you not only is it within the scope, but we have an order from March 1 saying that the vote should be occurring today at 7:15. I would suggest to you that we get on with it and vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, we have a number of people that do want to get up on this, and I'm going to ask all of them to be very judicious and very short in their questions to the point of order that we have before us. The honourable member for Calgary-Noso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 3 points. First of all, to add to the point of order that's been made on decorum, the reality is what happened here is that on a major issue of foreign policy, the Liberals came in with a substantive amendment that changed 7 out of 9 components of the original motion, including changing the unilateral recognition of Palestine to something else, on the back of a napkin, and told the NDP what to do. Point 1. Point 2. Anybody voting by app tonight will not have had a chance to see this. So there are going to be people at home that will not have seen this. The last component is language. This is one of the most substantive amendments that's been tabled in this House on a major point of foreign policy. Our peer nations are watching this. They are going to think that this Parliament is a complete joke because the government is coming in at the end and table dropping this motion and expecting Parliament to vote on it. This sends a poor message to our peer nations, and Mr. Speaker, this should be ruled out of order.
A few more comments. Like I said, keep them very, very, very short. The honourable member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Speaker. And I'll just refer to Chapter 12 of our procedure book from Bosque Gagnon, the 2017 edition. And it says, an amendment is out of order procedurally if, and then the third bullet is completely contrary to the main motion and would produce the same result as the defeat of the main motion. And I draw your attention again to the original motion that said in paragraph I, which is the official recognition of the state of Palestine, to what the amendment says, which if I'll go back to the very last part of paragraph N, which says maintain Canada's position that Israel has a right to exist. Mr. Speaker, by defeating the original motion, the motion that was debated all day long in this House, and to defeat it would have our position go back to what is the official position of the government in Canada and has been for the last couple of decades. So, Mr. Speaker, I'll say again, this amendment is out of order procedurally and should be ruled that way by you as the chair.
Still, the honourable member for Simcoe North.
Mr. Speaker, I'm new in this place, but my colleague mentioned that the NDP member consented to the amendment. Now, like that has any kind of relevancy because it's the same member who on multiple occasions says that a private member who accepts an amendment that has been ruled out of order is irrelevant in that circumstance. So he'll have to tell me how it makes sense in that case and not this one.
Okay, seeing that there are no other further comments on that. I wish it was within my power to be able to hold that vote tomorrow, because I do recognize that there is a substantive change to the motion. So some members will not have the opportunity to actually do it.
So if it's substantive, then it has to be out of order.
But it is not within my power because there has been a motion in this House, so I am ordered to have the vote immediately. Unless someone would want to ask for unanimous consent to have a vote tomorrow with a specific time. The Honourable House Leader for the official opposition.
Sure, Mr. Speaker. Given what you've just said, and after having some discussions among members of various parties, I'm sure that there will be agreement in order to allow members to do their due diligence. If we're going to take this seriously, if we're going to show Canadians in the world that foreign policy isn't done on the back of a napkin with two negotiators without any kind of consultation, is there unanimous consent to defer this vote to tomorrow?
I'm already hearing a number of votes, so or a number of no's already to delay this. Let me. Let me do it. An amendment must be relevant. And we'll go to Chapter 12. This has been quoted a number of times already today. An amendment must be relevant to the motion seeks to amend. It must not stray from the main motion, but aim to refine its meaning and intent. The amendment should take the form of a motion to leave out certain words in order to add other words, leave out certain words, or insert or add other words to the main motion. An amendment should be so framed that, if agreed to, it will leave the main motion intelligible and internally consistent. An amendment is out of order procedurally if it is irrelevant to the main motion, it raises a question substantially the same as the one the House has decided in the same session, or conflicts with an amendment already agreed to, or if it completely is contrary to the main motion that would produce the same result as the defeat of the main motion. So I don't have a lot of procedure to go with on this one. The Honourable House Leader for the official opposition.
But just on that point, Mr. Speaker, you just literally referenced the point that my colleague from Selkirk Interlake and that I made myself, that when the amendment is so different, the original motion called for a unilateral recognition, the revised motion calls for a negotiated one. Those are two diametrically opposed aspects of the motion. One cannot, this is not a question of refining the main motion, this is a massively substantive change to the original motion, which rises to the level of defeating the main motion.
Or let me quote him a little more. Any part of the amendment is out of order. It originates with the mover of the main motion. The challenge we had here tonight is that we did have a motion that was substantial, one that was agreed to by the mover of the motion. So it doesn't leave me a lot of leeway to rule it out of order. So, unfortunately, it being 8:28, it is my duty to interrupt the proceedings and put forward every question necessary to dispose of the business of supply. And the question is as follows.